I built the ultimate craft table with a decorative epoxy top, craft paper roller, as well as massive Lego storage. So follow along if you'd like to see how I built this. First step is to do the milling process. I use poplar for the wood table, and it is rough sawn lumber, so I do have to do quite a bit of surfacing, planing, joining. I do like to make sure it's under 8% for indoor projects. This is an exaggerated video, but a lot of times people don't know how far of the end grain to cut off. I always just like to tap it on the table, and if it breaks off, then you know you need to cut off more. This poplar is pretty twisted and bowed, so it will take more of the milling process to get it flat and squared. This poplar is 8/4, so for the table legs I try to keep it around that 2 inches, and then the remainder of it I will rip down on the bandsaw and make it 3/4. On one edge of the table legs, I do cut them a little wider than 2 inches, so that way I can plane them down completely square with the planer. Now I head over to the bandsaw and start ripping down the remainder of the pieces that I need for the apron, the lower apron, as well as the stretcher. I also do the tabletop with 3/4 thickness poplar. For a benchtop bandsaw, I was actually pretty happy with how level it ripped these down. It's also fun making book match pieces like that too. Then I head over to the planer and make sure all of them are equal thickness. I cut them all a little bit long, and then I label all my pieces so that way I don't cut the wrong board and then have to start over. I built a mortising jig mainly out of scrap plywood, and I use this 1/2-inch upcut bit to help make the mortising holes, joints, whatever you want to call it. Then I set the depth of how deep I'm going to take it with my plunge router and do all the sides of the table legs, including the short and long aprons and the lower aprons. And then I chisel those out square, and then I head over to the table saw to make the tenons. Help a girl out and hit the like button. It took me a long time to build these plans, make the table, and do the epoxy, so I just appreciate a little bit of support. I set up a stop block so that way I know how deep to go, and when using a miter gauge, you don't want your workpiece flush against the fence. It can promote kickback, which obviously is not a cool thing to happen. I do dry fit all the pieces first to make sure everything is square and fits nice and tight. It would have been nice to have an extra hand to put this together, but I reached for my trusty Xbox coffee mug and it worked like a charm. I did kind of a non-traditional tabletop. I used tongue and groove. That groove is actually used to be the inset for the epoxy tabletop. Then I cut out a little finger hole so that way you can lift the epoxy tabletop and flip it over where the Lego base plate will be on the opposite side. Where I cut off the top portion of the groove, I didn't want to go all the way through, so that way it made a perfect square for the epoxy top to set into. So then I just chisel out what my router bit could not take out. Then I dry fit everything, make sure it's square. For the bottom storage, I used 1/2-inch plywood. I did rabbet out the bottom portions of the aprons, so only on the inside bottom portions of those I used about a 3/8 rabbet bit to cut a 1/2-inch deep groove. Then I cut out those cute little squares so that way it sits inside of the table legs. Then I had to cut the plywood about 6 further times, dry fitting it every time, making sure it was snug and not taking off too much. I finally got it and it fit like butter. Well, not really. You see, I had to kind of push it in there. I clamped the bottom to the apron and I used Craig pocket holes and screwed those in, and then I cover the pocket holes with plugs. Not that anybody would ever see them, I just didn't want them to be able to feel the hole. And bloop! Can't even tell it's there. I wanted the paper roller to be kind of hidden underneath the table legs, but I also didn't want it to go through and through. I wanted it to look nice and concealed. So I made a jig and only went partial way just as a guide for the roller to roll down on. I use a longer piece of wood just so that way I had more of a handle so I wouldn't get kicked back, especially at the router table. And then I use a flush trim bit to round over the edges smoothly. And then here's what you should not do at the miter table. It actually was not that big of a mistake. As soon as I used a round over bit, you couldn't even see the gouge marks in it. I attached the top with dowels, 1/4 inch on the aprons, and for the table legs I used 3/8 just to give the top a little bit extra stability. Then I take dowel transfer pins and push down on the tabletop. Then you can see a cute little indentation on it, and you can drill that out and then put your dowels in and do a dry fit and make sure it fits nice and snug before you glue everything. I use Titebond 2 glue for this glue up. It's not mustard. Yes, I store my glue in mustard bottles. It keeps and doesn't plug as bad as the glue bottles that comes with it. I sand the poplar at 80 and work my way up to 320. Whenever there's dents and scratches, you can water pop and then use an iron. It just helps the grain bulge out a little bit better. I wouldn't use 80 grit on the plywood because you can really strip off that veneer coating that they use on it. Plywood only takes a very light sanding. This is an antique walnut finish by General Finishes gel staining. If you haven't used gel staining, it's night and day compared to the other stuff. Check out the links below. I'll have some of the products in which I use to build this table. Now it's time to do the epoxy top. I seal everything with silicone, do a base coat that way to seal off any air bubbles, and then start doing the pours of the colors and design in which I like. I did have to completely redo the epoxy top. Originally I used 1/4 inch plywood, and unfortunately as the epoxy dries it contracted too much and I pulled it out of the silicone mold too quickly, and unfortunately it bowed so bad that I couldn't use it any further. So I built a whole new one and it came out better, which I should have just used MDF to start with. I don't know what I was thinking. Since I can't do a flood coat to go over the edges because I was limited on my tabletop size, I have to shave down the meniscus just so that way it's not sharp for the little girl that this table is going to. I like to use a spoke shave for this. That way I can keep equal pressure on both sides. I find when I use a blade, it unfortunately gouges or the angle just doesn't stay right. Now it's time to attach the base plates on the opposite side of the MDF. You can actually lay down taller Lego blocks, and I use a carpet cutter and it actually worked very, very well. I was actually quite surprised with how easy it was. I do a light sanding just to take off any of the little sharp pieces. It actually wasn't that sharp, I just wanted it to be smooth. And then to make sure that there's no gaps or unequal edges, I take Lego blocks and bridge all of the base plates together, glue it, flip it over, then I weight it down with plywood and weights on top. And then here's the final product with my little paper roller. I figured the stretcher was a nice touch, so that way she could rest her legs on it while she's building some Legos or making some cool drawings. This was a pretty fun build. I got to learn a lot from it. I even sat down and made my own Legos. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button or leave a comment below. Nibbles, you need to move or we're going to wrap you up.